December 14th, it marked the 2-year anniversary of that tragic moment that will forever be remembered in our nation's history. Of course, I'm talking about the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, where the gunman stormed into that school and took the lives of 20 innocent children and 6 staff members, making it the deadliest mass shooting at a school in U.S. history. Now, after the tragic incident, the entire nation, as you remember, seemed to rally together to call for change, some kind of change as it related to our gun laws. But let's be honest, very little change is actually taking course in the vast majority of this country since that day. I'm going to fast forward to today, just if you want to get a frame of reference. Take a look at the scene in Austin, Texas this morning. That's where gun rights advocates stood armed outside the state capitol, where lawmakers gathered to meet for the first day of the legislative session. You see, they were pretty worked up because the group, they want to get their major initiative, which is to relax gun laws even more than they are right now. And they staged a very unique demonstration to get their point across. They built a firearm with a machine known as a ghost gunner. The group is also calling on lawmakers to scrap the state's handgun licensing requirements altogether. They're also calling for a change to the state's open carry laws, which prevent gun owners from carrying handguns openly in public. And with all these efforts, you would think that these activists turning a blind eye to tragedies that we've seen as Lake. Take a look at some just recent incidents that we just took from the papers in the last month here. Toddler in Idaho shot and killed his mother inside of a Walmart with her own handgun that she had tucked away in the purse. Virginia, 5-year-old, was playing with a gun, shot his friend who was also 5 years of age. And while mentally competent people are asking for more lenient gun laws, it doesn't seem as though it's too difficult for someone who has a mental health issue to get their hands on one. Obviously, we take the case of Brinsley. He, the Baltimore man who traveled to New York and killed those 2 officers. And as we know, he was successful in his horrible compact. His mother says he had a long history of mental health issues, as did, of course, Adam Lanza, the shooter in Sandy Hook. All right, I want to try and unpack this in a few different ways. 2 years ago, there was a misstep, we'd all agree, where LaPierre comes out for the NRA, gives a tone-deaf address. Poll numbers come out, 91% of the nation and 74% of NRA members all believe that we can have universal background checks on guns. Fast forward 2 years later, New York, Connecticut, a couple other states passed gun laws that are more restrictive. But in the majority of states, the overwhelming majority of states, gun laws like being able to bring guns into bars while you're drinking are legal. Being able to bring guns into churches or into public parks is now legal. And I can keep going up and down. We talked about this before. You haven't been part of this prior conversation. What happened when 90% of America never agree on anything, agree they wanted something? I know it's the gun lobby and something else, but something else happened where we not only didn't do anything, we went the other direction. With the benefit of hindsight, what happened on this issue?
There's just, in this country in general, when it comes to crises, there's a limited amount of resolve. That resolve lasts for a relatively short period of time. There's a lot of talk and there's a lot of goodwill, but there's ultimately not a lot of action in Washington, and I don't think that's because there are a lot of people that don't care. I just think that this is the culture, this is the country that we live in.
But the optics today, and I've seen it in other places, we saw this after in Arizona, Gabby Giffords was even shot. The idea when you have a terrible tragedy, where rational people would say you could come at the issue from 2 different directions. But the idea that it makes sense to carry firearms in public to make your point that you already have a right to do this, but now, or having a guy with a Bushmaster walk into a Starbucks and wait for coffee, that this somehow makes sense in this country, and we can't in its face look at this and say, we've gone off the rails here. This is insane. This is a public safety issue. This makes no sense. And the public's looking at these pictures. How do we get there is my point. I understand the deep-seated debate we have over where the Second Amendment starts and stops, but this doesn't make sense what we're looking at.
Vigilantism, that sort of that
I don't even know if
notion
we're
that
there,
it's
but
gonna-
it certainly is.
But there's one issue we don't address in any of this is gun safety, and the incidents you mentioned
No,
earlier.
how about you deal with this one first? How does this make sense?
I'm going to the intro of what we talked about. The stories you talked about before, gun safety was something that was ignored.
Is this gun
Number
safety?
two, Number two, I'm going to the
Well, deal
intro.
with yours. Gun
Richard,
safety, is
number
that
two,
safe?
number two. Well, actually, it is, and I'll tell you why in a second. Number two.
This is safe.
Richard, number two, the mentally ill in this country are not properly cared for and addressed with this issue. Okay. Number three, do you want them to leave their weapons if they're taking them out there on the seat of their car and have somebody else break the window and take it with
Let
them?
me answer your
That's
question.
my
Let me answer your question. I don't want the idiot who feels the need to have a Bushmaster in the first place, and they are an idiot, to take it out of their home. I don't want the woman, when she's going to the A&P here, to feel the need to pack heat. And when I go to a diner like this guy, I don't want to be sitting next to a guy with a rifle. Or if I'm going to get a Starbucks, I don't want to have these two ding-dongs thinking that it's perfectly fine, albeit legal, to carry in assault weapons while they're online here to get their macchiato. To me, this does not make sense. And as a
They're
country,
obeying the rules where they are.
well, the rules are stupid.
That's the
Obey.
laws. You can't. No, Richard, you cannot.
You don't
sit
think
here.
that's a stupid rule?
Richard, we're sitting here in Westchester County, New York. That's very different than Texas. You cannot tell me that the laws in Texas are identical to what should be here right now.
No.
I will never agree with that, Richard. Every state has the right to do what they're doing.
Richard, on that one, you and I know how you're looking at me right now, but on that one, OB is correct.
Wait, I'll let you go, Dominic.
Okay.
But in this country, in Texas, if they want a 15-year-old to drink, they can't.
Right.
In Texas, if they want a 12-year-old to drive, they can't. We have laws in this country, okay, at least the core laws. We're not talking about taking the Second Amendment and throwing it out. We have core laws in this country that, regardless of any of the 48 contiguous states or Alaska or Hawaii, that you have to adhere to. We're talking about a different world. Okay?
Richard, your
Well,
respect for the Second Amendment has never been there.
Okay, but
You
let me just
are
finish.
there.
You, no, don't make
That's
that declarative
true.
statement and
I'm
throw it
making
out.
that
You have
statement.
a right to bear
I've
arms, but
sat
you
in
don't
this
have.
seat before and seen this so many times.
Obi, stop. You don't have a right, in my view, in the Second Amendment, to bring a Bushmaster into a Starbucks.
If
you
that's
have a right
the
to bear
law in
arms.
Texas, that's the law.
Let
You
me
cannot sit here
just-
and dictate from Westchester what the law of the Second Amendment and their impression of it
Hey,
versus
Obi,
yours.
Obi, stop. I'm not telling Texas what they legally can or can't. What I am saying right now is it is a public safety issue. It is not in the national interest. Time out. And we have made changes in this country. If Texas wanted to have a law before where Dominic couldn't sit at a dining room counter, they did that too. It wasn't right. When Texas may have had a law before where a woman couldn't have a right to vote, we changed that because that wasn't right
Where
either.
have you defend the Second Amendment anywhere on the show historically?
Okay.
I don't need to defend it. It's right there. I'm sorry. Who's taking away your right to own a gun?
You're trying to.
Really?
Yes.
When have I said
When
you don't
you're
have a
sitting
right
here,
to own one?
I used to live in Texas. If I lived in Texas and I didn't own one in Texas, I was in the Army. What you're saying about people in Texas right now is what the law is not right because it doesn't meet your standards. You want to change the laws in Texas because it doesn't make Richard French's vision of what the Second Amendment is.
And let me just make this
Yeah.
one point. I'm with you, Richard, on guns. I really am. It's an outrage. But OB is correct to this degree. I've been in Idaho and Texas within the last 2 months. And the same way that we're strong against guns, they have shows on the air in those states advocating just the other way, Richard. Now, while I was there, I was actively looking to see if what I'd see someone walking around openly with a gun. And the only time that I saw it in Texas was I stopped in a liquor store and the security guard had a firearm. But other than that, everything was as normal as it is here in New York.
But here's the
they
point.
feel differently,
They
Richard.
may feel differently, but here's the point. 91% of Americans, that includes people in Texas.
Well, all
No, no.
politics are local. All
That
politics
sounds
are
great,
local.
Dominic, but 91% of Americans wanted something after a tragedy. And 91% of Americans and 3/4 of the NRA members wanted something too, and they still didn't get it.
I would argue that President Obama dropped the ball after Newtown. I mean, we've seen tragedies beget gun control laws in the past. LBJ passed gun control after the '68 violence. Clinton did it after Columbine in the late 90s. Obama didn't want to spend any political capital and was warned that it would cost him political capital to try
Power
to push
of
through
the
gun reform.
NRA.
He pushed it off to Biden, and it wound up dying on the vine because too much time went by. Now, as for the regional differences that we have, there are legitimate regional differences. And, for example, Texas or Idaho, ranch lands and farmlands, and there's a common sense need for long guns in those venues. The difference is, even people in Texas get freaked out when there's somebody with an automatic weapon strapped behind their back when they're at a supermarket or at a store. And I would suggest that it's incumbent on those stores to set policy. You can in Texas. You can carry a rifle with you anywhere in Texas except where the business or institution posts on the door that you can't bring it in there. And I would suggest that the push needs to be for store chains to say, no, you can't bring guns in here, or for people to stop patronizing those stores. I mean, it's...
Do you realize where we've gone here? Where we make it incumbent on a store to say to somebody that you can't bring an M16 when you're trying to buy a cup of coffee because I'm looking out for my customers. We've gotten to that point. And if I want to let every state decide, I don't want to let blacks eat here, I don't want to let women be able to do this. What do you mean, make it up? Of course I can.
Richard, what happens is when they put legislation through and the lobbyists get involved, they start dickering with the handles and the way things look. And they take a magazine and say it's got to be 7 instead of 10. It is a totally irrelevant aspect of public safety when they should be focusing on other things.
And former Congressman Chris Shays, who wrote the assault weapons ban, specifically said that was one of the loopholes that everybody went through. I don't think that means you stop trying. And look, I think the Second Amendment has been bastardized in a way these guys are using.
The founding fathers roll around the grave.
I think that's not what it's intended to be, but that's not where the public debate is at this point. And let's start focusing on maybe what small steps can be taken in the name of public safety, as opposed to.
And let me bring it back to where we started on this, which was open carry. And while this is going on in Texas, it's not just in Texas. And head over to Facebook and Twitter and make your opinion heard on the subject. Would open carry laws make your state safer or more dangerous? We'll get to that response in a future program. But coming up next, politics always breeds comparisons. But once again, a politician had dredged out the dumbest comparison imaginable. I think it's also just downright lazy. Can somebody please tell these guys to stop comparing anybody, including a president, to Hitler every time they don't agree with him? We'll talk about that and more after this.